So let's talk about a few of these structures in the dermis. On this slide, we're going to discuss the sensory receptors, or the nerve endings throughout the dermis. Remember that yes, our main theme is protection, but we can also protect ourselves by letting the brain know what's going on around our skin. So as you can see on the bottom, we can sense all sorts of different feelings and sensations, such as hot, cold, pressure, pain, touch. And what I want to do is I want to point out a few of these structures and relate them to the different sensations. So, I'm trying to find them. Okay, here we go. Took me a while, but a little bit. So, if you're looking at the picture, you're seeing this purple circle. What these are called are free nerve endings. So, I'll just put a free before this. Free nerve endings are responsible for detecting 3 of these sensations you see. They're responsible for detecting temperature, so hot and cold, and pain. Goes to something called a free nerve ending. And what that means is the nerve is exposed. The nerve is naked. Basically, you just have this structure and the ends of the nerve aren't protected, or what we call encapsulated. So these detect hot, cold, and pain, and that kind of goes hand in hand, right? If something's too hot, it can cause pain, and same thing with something too cold. Now, something that is not considered a free nerve ending, or let's say a bunch of nerve endings all wrapped together in a unit, is called a corpuscle. And I'll show you it in green here, kind of towards the bottom part of the picture. What you see is you see a nerve fiber, and then it kind of coils in on itself, and it makes this kind of loop-de-loop, swirly looking structure. What that is called, once again, is a corpuscle. So let me clear this up. I'll spell it for you. Corpuscle. And there are 2 types of corpuscles I want to introduce to you. The first one is called a Pacinian corpuscle. And we'll do that in green, because that's what the circle is in. And you can see it right here, the spelling. And that is responsible for detecting deep touch or pressure, same thing. So a Pacinian corpuscle, deep touch. So we also have corpuscles that are oriented in the exact same way. We'll do that in blue. So it's just a big loop-de-loop, swirly looking thing. And that is responsible for detecting light touch in the dermis. And what those are called are Meissner's corpuscles. So as you can see, a big theme in anatomy is when people discover this stuff, they tend to name it after themselves. Langerhans cells, Pacinian corpuscles, Meissner's corpuscles, Merkel cells, all those things. They're people's last names. So Meissner's corpuscles detect light touch. Now don't get Merkel cells confused with Meissner's corpuscles. They both start with M, and they're both detecting light touch, but the Merkel cells were really kind of hugged right up against that dermo-epidermal junction. They're in the epidermis, and the Meissner's corpuscles are found here in the dermis. So recap, the free nerve endings detect hot, cold, and pain. The Pacinian, P for Pacinian, P for pressure. How about that? The Pacinian corpuscles detect pressure or deep touch, and then the Meissner's corpuscles, similar to the Merkel cells, detect light touch. So yes, we have connective tissue all throughout the dermis. On the previous slide, we just talked about a bunch of nervous tissue throughout the dermis. And here we're going to talk about muscle tissue throughout the dermis. So we have 2 types of muscle in the dermis. Obviously, we don't have cardiac, right? So we're going to have the remaining 2, skeletal and smooth. Remember, skeletal muscle is voluntary. And this is kind of unique because most of your skeletal muscles are not going to be found kind of within the skin. They're going to be found under the skin, for example, in your arms, legs, abdominal, back region. But in the face area, these facial muscles are actually located in the dermis. There we go. I couldn't find my mouse for a second. So once again, voluntary with skeletal muscle, and therefore this is going to help us with facial expressions. This is going to help us smile and frown and laugh, and all of those tiny little intricate muscles that we're going to learn next module are going to come into play here. Now there also are involuntary muscles in the dermis. We call those smooth muscles. Specifically, the name of the smooth muscle is the erector pili muscles. And these muscles actually attach directly to the hair follicles, and when they contract, they actually pull on the hair follicle and cause the hair to stand straight up. And we see this whenever we're freaked out, or when we're cold, or when we're just emotional, right? Good moving movie or speech or something. I get goosebumps when I watch sports sometimes. I'm weird, I don't know. But it's just it's an emotional response. So this is due to the smooth muscle contracting, pulling on those hair follicles, making the hair actually stand up on your skin. We're also going to eventually get to the hair follicles, and then the sweat glands, oil glands, that kind of stuff. But as you can see in the notes, a little more information on this coming up. We just want to throw it in here because we're giving you an overview of the dermis at this point. And we're also going to cover this in more detail later on as well, but we can control temperature with the dermis. We have a lot of very, very small blood vessels called capillaries, and your nervous system can actually dictate or manipulate if the blood goes to the skin or goes away from the skin. And if blood actually goes to the skin, it's going to actually warm your skin up, cause some sweating potentially. And if it goes away from the skin, it's actually going to make your skin rather cold. You might get some of those goosebumps we just talked about. So we'll get into a little bit more of this in just a bit. Another characteristic with the dermis is growth and repair. And unlike the epidermis, the dermis doesn't actually have to regenerate and make new cells all the time. Remember, the epidermis, we're constantly making new cells in that stratum basale because those cells in the stratum corneum are constantly shedding off, right? And we're killing them in the stratum granulosum. So with the dermis, though, we only get this rapid mitotic activity or regeneration when we cut ourselves, when healing needs to take place. So in that situation, what happens is, remember, we have a lot of dense, irregular, and areolar tissue in your dermis of your skin. So we have a lot of collagen fibers and a few elastic fibers. So the stem cells that make those fibers that we talked about in the tissues chapter are your fibroblasts. Remember, stem cells that make protein fibers. So in the case of wound healing, yes, we do need to repair these things. We do need to make new protein fibers to repair the skin. And in the odd situation that the wound is pretty significant and we're not able to make those proteins fast enough, what we basically do is just put some duct tape on the situation. I currently have some duct tape and zip ties holding my bumper together because I don't want to pay for brand new fibroblasts because they're expensive. So I'll put duct tape on the car for now, and it doesn't look pretty, but it works. And that's kind of what your body does, is it'll lay down this scar tissue, this kind of fibrotic mesh tissue, and it gets the job done. It holds it together, but sometimes from a cosmetic standpoint, it can leave a scar. And then at that point, it's really hard to clean that up and regenerate new tissue. Another cool thing that can happen with the dermis is the appearance of stretch marks. And stretch marks occur when elastic fibers get stretched, and really it happens when they get stretched in a very short amount of time. So this is very, very common, as you can see in the notes, in pregnancy. Very common, right? During first trimester, a lot of moms aren't even showing. Some don't even know that they're pregnant. You fast forward 4 or 5 months to your third trimester, and the mom's about to pop, and that skin over the belly region has stretched significantly in a very short amount of time. So a lot of times what you'll get is these tiny white scar-like looking structures, and that's just due to overstretching of the skin. In the picture, you can see this. This never happened to me, good or bad, I don't know. But you can see kind of these white streaky lines in this gentleman's axillary area, and that's because this guy just got jacked real quickly. He hit the bench press or did a crazy amount of push-ups in a very short amount of time, and his muscles hypertrophied. His muscles grew very, very quickly, and his skin had a hard time catching up. So that can happen a lot of times with bodybuilders, weightlifters, football players, those kind of guys. And females, you can get this too. It's just I have a picture of a guy. So nothing long-term, nothing serious. This is not going to cause symptoms. It's more of just a cosmetic thing to be aware of. Deeper to the dermis, or underneath the dermis, we have another layer of tissue called the hypodermis, and that should make sense, right? Hypo means underneath or less than or below. So other names for the hypodermis are the subcu layer or the subcutaneous layer, and also superficial fascia. And remember, we talked about fascia a little bit, mainly that loose areolar tissue that kind of packages organs and cavities, just kind of lines everything. So it makes sense that the hypodermis is mainly made up of loose areolar fibers, and actually a lot of it really is just fat. And you can look at this picture right here, all the way below the dermis, you see all these kind of yellow looking circular structures, and those are the adipocytes from adipose tissue. And remember, we talked about the functions of adipose tissue, one being keeping us warm, temperature regulation, right? Another one is for energy storage in case we don't get to eat every few hours. We can tap into our energy stores, fat. And 3, it's just cushioning. It's just protection. Just like every other thing in the skin, our main goal is protection. This is no different here in the hypodermis. It can serve as a form of protection. It's also going to connect the other skeletal muscles below the skin to the skin. So if you wanted to see your biceps muscle, what you would do is you would cut through the epidermis, then the dermis, and then the hypodermis, and directly under that hypodermis fascia region, you would actually get to muscle tissue.